Welcome back to Patriots Central Radio. We are here with Steph Stradley of the Houston Chronicle. Steph, Matt picked that song for you. I hope you liked it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard it in a while.
I'm an old school guy. I may not have grown up necessarily in that era, but I love the music.
Well, there you go.
So, Steph, let's get right into this matchup this weekend. One of the big components of the Patriots offense has been the use of their running backs this year and how they can create mismatches on the outside with guys like Dion Lewis and James White. How do you see the Texans matching up with that this weekend?
Well, it's interesting. Over the course of the season, the Texans' running game has gotten much, much better. It started off the year where their pass defense was good, but their run defense was not so good. And sometimes that's just a question of how those particular games are going. But they were having some issues. And I think over the course of the season, their run defense has gotten better. I can't say that they've always faced very good run offenses. So, this is going to be a test for them, getting a team that is very balanced and can damage you in different ways.
Now, do you see a guy like Bernard McKinney or Brian Cushing even being able to run with a guy like Dion Lewis if the Patriots split him out kind of in a slot position, or they flex him, or they flex out James White, or maybe if they go split backs?
I don't know exactly how Romeo Crennel is going to scheme that because, both of those guys, as you're suggesting, are not necessarily the best coverage guys. So, they have done different things against different offenses, and I'm not sure how they're going to scheme it for this particular game because, it has definitely been an issue covering, fast guys over the middle and trying to keep up with them. Now they've done, they can do that on spot basis, but if they're tested like that over the course of a game, they're going to be in trouble.
Steph, on Saturday, it looked a little bit like quarterback Brock Osweiler got his swagger back a little bit. Do you think his mojo is back, or do you think it was just one game against a backup quarterback?
I think it's one of those things that was helpful for him to get an early lead in the game because then, he's not always working from behind or in a tight game. I think part of the issue this year is, you have, they really overhauled their entire offense this year. Normally when you get a new coach, they, do major overhauling the first year, but they really didn't spend a whole bunch of resources on the offensive side of the ball. O'Brien's first year or even his second year. And then they realized, hey, look, our offense isn't getting better and we're going to have to bite the bullet and bring more people in. And so when you do that, you have a lot of turnover and, nobody else cares that you're, don't know your offense as well as, the other teams know their offenses. So you have that going, you have a quarterback learning a new system that's not the easiest to learn. You're having rookies learning how to play wide receiver in that system, which is not easy even for experienced wide receivers. The tight ends actually got more involved with the game this year, but this is, their third year in the scheme. So the tight end position was used a lot, especially early in the season. And then the offensive line had been a mess. They've had injuries at key spots. The rookie that they drafted for center, he didn't even make it to the season due to injury. So, they were on their plan D. It took them a while to get Dwayne Brown back at left tackle. And so that's a lot of things going on. So when you have that much trouble on your offense and you're just learning to play together, plus you have a great defense, well, then how do you play that game? If you're given those cards, how do you dial up a game? And they've had to kind of work around that. And so I would think that to some degree, some of this is on Osweiler, definitely. He has thrown a number of very errant passes, even things that are pretty easy throws, you would think. But a lot of times it's difficult to tell whether, which things were him and which things were the receiving targets. He's had a lot of drops this season, and, that's partially, his accuracy and partially there were some balls that were dropped by people. So a lot of that's just also execution, right? But ultimately speaking, you have to play the game that you're presented. And the way that the last game went, they took shots when they needed to, and they got conservative when they had a lead. That's probably not going to be the game plan for this upcoming Saturday. They're going to have to execute, and even if they execute at their best, it might not be good enough. But they haven't had to be very aggressive on offense. They haven't had to rely on Osweiler too much. But at some key spots during the course of the season, they came back from an impossible deficit at home against the Colts. Like that game, a lot of the fans gave up on that game because they were so far behind and thought that such a bad offense could never catch up, and they did.
One of those big catches that you hinted at was to DeAndre Hopkins down the sideline, which I thought was probably Brock's best throw of the season. Just a perfect.
It was one of them. I would
throw.
say that one and maybe earlier in the season, like you can count them on one hand. But yeah, that was a good throw.
Do you think that connection, obviously all season, Hopkins had 4 different quarterbacks last year and had much better numbers than what he had with Osweiler for most of the season? Do you think that that's a good sign for that connection, or was it just one heck of a play by a good receiver?
It's really confusing to see how much difficulty they have had on their connection, because if you watched them during camp, you thought, oh my gosh, DeAndre Hopkins is going to have 1 million catches, because it looked like they had a special connection during training camp. But then what happened during the season is that teams loaded up on Hopkins and tried to take Hopkins out of the game. And then sometimes, like for the good wide receivers, you're going to have to put it into double coverage sometimes, and he just was not getting it in the window. And so some of the interceptions that Brock Osweiler was having early in the season was because he was getting it to Hopkins, but it wasn't getting there, or it hit him, it was just a little too errant. They just were not connecting. And I think over the course of the season, they spread the ball around a little bit more. And so if he's not being covered, double coverage, he's going to have some opportunities. And part of it is, he has dropped a lot of balls that in the past couple of years he would have normally caught. And that's really unusual. But, I think it all comes to execution, for all of the Texans offense. Hopkins has to have his best game. Osweiler has to have a game where he's not the albatross for the entire team. Like, he has to play a reasonably decent game and not turn the ball over. You just can't turn the ball over. That was the story of the first game. The first game was the special teams and the offense was so bad, the defense didn't really have a chance because they were going to end up being on the field too long.
Talking with Steph Stradley.
That particular formula will kill the Texans. If the offense is so bad where they're 3 and outing over and over again, the defense is not going to be able to save the day.
Talking with Steph Stradley of the Houston Chronicle. Steph, when J.J. Watt went down, a lot of people kind of put their hopes for the Texans season down the drain. One person who didn't let that happen was Jadeveon Clowney. He has really come on and turned into the player, now that he's healthy, that everybody thought he was going to be when he got drafted with that top pick. What have you seen different out of Clowney, and how has Romeo Crennel been able to use him that's accentuated everything good that he can do?
Yeah, there's some people that talk about Clowney all of a sudden showing up at the end of the season, but, he has had a great season from start to finish pretty much. He had to miss a game in the mix, but he's been very solid against the run, and part of him doing the work on that is maybe he doesn't have as gaudy numbers as he would be, if he was like pass rushing as an outside linebacker, for example. But they are moving him around. They're putting him in opportunities to take advantage of some things. He's playing disciplined football, so he's good against the run, but he can show amazing, physically, he does some crazy things that should not be physically possible by somebody of his size. And yeah, it's a shame that, we're not talking January football with Watt and Clowney, because that would be something to see. Like, you've seen it over the course, but, they've never been really, really healthy at the same time, and with the defense completely clicking. But that would be something to see.
Now, one guy who is healthy but is talking about potentially it being the end of his career is Vince Wilfork. Obviously, fans up here in New England love Big Vince. Was a corner piece to this team for a long time. What has he meant to the development of the Houston defense, especially a guy like Clowney or a guy like Whitney Mercilus, who have both really come on strong this year?
Well, I mean, when you don't have stability at the quarterback position, you have to look at other positions to present leadership to the team. And so when you have a player like Watt out, for example, even Watt, he was asked to be kind of a leader before he had, because he was so good, but before he had a lot of years in the league. And, there is nothing that surprises Vince Wilfork by this time in his career. Like, he has seen everything, and people very much respect him. And it's great when the Texans have drafted so many good players, but having a stable force like Vince to, who's seen it all. And really, having him in the front of the defense is just been great, because it allows Romeo to kind of, like, if he is the sun, then the rest of the defense is kind of like the satellites around him. Because they move, like, he's always going to be in that middle section if he's in the game, and then everybody else is moving around him, and they can do different things based on what they're seeing and what the time of the game is and where they are on the field. I mean, he's been great. People here love him, and I guess the Houston part of his career involved lots more barbecue and overalls.
Easily one of the best pieces of TV ever. I'll go on record and say that. Him surprising Bill O'Brien in the overalls might be the best single piece that Hard Knocks has ever done.
I have to say that's one of my greatest regrets, is that I was not at camp that day, because that would have been remarkable to see. I actually think, as much as that was cool to see that, I think Hard Knocks was net negative to the team. That was a distraction, and now you could see a difference even from the Hard Knocks years to not. I mean, it was a better camp for them.
Steph, Clowney and Whitney Mercilus get a lot of the headlines on this Texans defense, but the Texans really have a very diverse and deep secondary led by A.J. Bouye, who's surprisingly been one of the best corners in the league. Do you think that Romeo Crennel has some of his creativity that he's been able to implement this season has a lot to do with some of the players that they've added in that secondary?
Well, yeah, and they lost the corner that they drafted in Kevin Johnson early in the season, so that they're doing this, losing him has been amazing. But I mean, I think the key part of that secondary and the soul of that secondary is Jonathan Joseph, who's been doing this for a while. He's still playing at a very high level. He's often not targeted, and sometimes when he does, he makes he makes players pay. And so Bouye, in the meantime, has been targeted a lot, mostly because there's concern that he played a little bit too physically, and so he would get pass interference calls against him. But this season, he has played very, very well. It's shown up in, all the, advanced statistics and stuff. But, he's going to get paid. Right now he's not getting paid because, he's an undrafted guy, and it took a while for him to come on. But, he's a key part of what Romeo has done. And really, the MVP of the Houston Texans right now is Romeo Crennel, because over the course of the season, the Texans lost a corner here, and then the corner would come back, or a linebacker here. They were having players that typically play inside linebacker have to play outside linebacker just because they didn't have the numbers at times in the season. And he's made it work. I mean, there have been games where the Texans have not been able to score very many points, but they win those games because they just dominated the other side. Now, whether that can happen against the Patriots offense is a different story, but I think that they'd like to have another shot where maybe their special teams doesn't fumble the ball early in the game and their offense can't do anything.
Speaking of their offense, looks like Tom Savage was a full participant in practice according to the injury report today. Obviously, Brock is going to start for the Texans. How long is the leash if things don't go right for him early, where Bill O'Brien's going to make that switch and get Savage in the game? Or is that not even an option?
I think everything's on the table because O'Brien has done things a whole bunch of different ways. I think maybe last year in the playoffs where they just got crushed against Kansas City at home, I think he wishes he would have pulled the hook because Hoyer had 2 concussions over the course of the season and just didn't look right that game. And sometimes, especially with quarterbacks that don't have a lot of track record, they just don't have a day. And really, and part of it with Osweiler, to be fair to him, some of his really wretched performances this season have been against very good defenses, or in the Patriots case, by the time that the Patriots played the Texans at that part of the season, most of the Patriots players knew that offense better than Osweiler did. They probably still do. But at least maybe at this point in the season, he has some sort of fighting chance. But, yeah, I wouldn't expect a quick hook. It may be that he – I think especially given that what happened with Hoyer last year, I'm not sure that they would be super eager to go to Savage if things go bad just because of his own history. But, a lot of times with some of these things, it's kind of like trying to make the better of a lot of bad choices.
Steph, Bill O'Brien and Coach 3, especially up here, got some flack about his coaching decisions, the way he coached that game, losing 27-0 to a rookie quarterback making his first ever start. And also the Texans, like you mentioned, had some special teams fumbles that really turned the game. Do you think that Bill O'Brien is a good enough coach to come into Foxborough and beat Bill Belichick?
Well, ultimately, the game comes down to execution. If the players on the field don't execute properly, there's nothing that any kind of coaching can do. There's only so many options that you have as returner on your roster, and if the returner can't return it when he's on a road game, that's not something that he coached to have happen. He didn't coach to have errant passes, so you're getting stoned at the line because your offensive line is terrible. And I guess the other thing is, I know a lot is made about the whole third string quarterback thing. And really, nobody would want to face Tom Brady. Obviously, GOAT and all that kind of stuff. But I will say, I really don't like when the Texans face quarterbacks who can run. Because when that happens, they can't just pin their ears back and pass rush because, all it takes is, a step here or there and the guy runs. And so I actually think that they have some of their better performances against more traditional quarterbacks. And even with a quarterback that can run some, they had a very good game against the Packers on the road in the snow for all 4 quarters. And that was a game until Jonathan Joseph got hurt, and then they put in Charles James, who slipped and gave up a touchdown, and that ended up being kind of the deciding point in that game. But that was a very competitive game that a lot of people didn't give the Texans any chance to win. And, that game was a game.
It was. One coach that's on the Texans staff that's filled with expatriates is Mike Vrabel, and he's gotten a lot of talk about potentially being a head coach someday. Do you see that in his future?
Oh, definitely. I would be surprised if it didn't happen. He's done amazing work in terms of just as a position coach, just X's and O's. He obviously knows a lot about playing defense and playing offense for that matter. And so many people have kind of declared him as one of the smartest players that they've played with. And you can tell just watching him coach how much the players like to play for him. And so, if you have a combination of somebody who's really, really smart, who has the respect of somebody who played the game at a high level and has the desire to put in the hours on it, I would be surprised. He's already interviewed, I guess, previously, or he was asked to interview for the 49ers job and declined it after Bob McNair was rumored to give him reasons to stay in Houston. So, no, I think it's just a matter of time. Now, the question is whether he jumps from a position coach to a head coach. But, there is some idea that maybe down the road when Romeo Crennel no longer wants to coach for the team that they would be in line. But right now, given all sorts of rumors about Bill O'Brien and so forth, who knows what the coaching staff's going to look like.
Steph, you hit on what I was just about to ask you there with the Bill O'Brien rumors. Can you please tell me that those are complete nonsense? Because it seems like Bill O'Brien's a guy who is a really good coach who has had a really kind of a tough lot with different quarterbacks, different guys he may not have hand selected, and he's willed this team to the playoffs a couple times, and he's winning the division. Is that all just the rumor mill, or is there some credence behind those rumors?
Okay, I don't want to speak out of turn as far as knowing anything specifically as to these rumors, but I do know a lot of the personalities involved. I think there's a cultural difference between Bill O'Brien and, the GM Rick Smith and Bob McNair, and that, Bob McNair is very mannered. I guess is the best, he has very good manners. He's very polite to people. He likes politeness. Bill O'Brien, on the other hand, and Rick Smith tends to be of that mold. Bill O'Brien, on the other hand, is a pretty fiery person. And it's not all bad because it's kind of like, heart of gold kind of stuff. Like he'll be known to be really short and gruff one press conference, and then the next press conference kind of come out and say, yeah, I was in kind of a bad mood, and, then he's really very cordial the next. And that's just a stylistic thing. As to, who does what, there's always been a discussion that the process in drafting and acquiring players is collaborative, and you saw probably some of that with the whole Hard Knocks bit. But how that collaboration goes and how much power different parties have utilized, that's kind of an unknown with the specifics. I can tell you for a fact that Bob McNair very much appreciates organizations like the Steelers who have a lot of continuity with the way that they run things, both with their GM and with their coaching staff. But, ultimately, you can't have a situation where it's not working well. But Bob McNair has specifically said, he is under contract. We have no plans to do this. I don't know where you've heard, I don't know where they got that information. That information's false, and you shouldn't report that. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And McNair doesn't, McNair prefers not to say anything versus saying something that is a lie. And he sometimes is overly honest when he talks about things. So it would be very surprising if he said those things publicly and then said something completely different.
She's Steph Stradley of the Houston Chronicle. Steph, where can people find you on social media, and what do you have coming up before this game?
Oh, boy, I have some really, really good posts coming up. People can find me on Twitter at StephPH Stradley, Stradley. In my Twitter bio, I have links to various writing that I do. And the things I have coming up is everybody knows that the Patriots are highly favored, and a lot of people give the Texans no chance, and they make them a punchline, and, why are they even playing the game kind of talk. And then the question is, okay, if the Texans were to beat the Patriots, what would be the way that you do it? And so I asked various people I know to opine on that subject. And then I'm going to have my normal game preview.
Well, since you have the preview, we got to get one more thing out of you before we let you go. What's your prediction for the game?
Oh, geez. I never do win-loss things typically. I thought that the Texans were going to win last week, and they did. I didn't even think it was going to be a close game. As for this week, it would be ridiculous not to think that the Patriots were going to win, and probably win big, just because they are rested, they are healthier, they're playing at home, they're a 1 seed in just about every statistical category. They are superior to the Texans. So the Texans are going to have to play the kind of game that they've played in stretches, which is they have to execute. The Patriots the Patriots have much fewer drops than the Texans do, so the Texans cannot rely on a game like what happened with the Raiders, where the Raiders sometimes bailed them out with penalties. Now, I will tell you the Texans are the least penalized team in the league, with the fewest pre-snap penalties. They're fairly, disciplined that way, especially for a team that is as good in defense as they are, because this is not a league that favors defense. Defense is called pretty harshly. So to be the least penalized team, but, to have that kind of defense is remarkable. That's why the Texans are in the playoffs, is because they have played very well in key times and haven't shot themselves in the foot too much with the games that they've won, and have played. They've had key moments where they've done great things. There have been some remarkable plays that have pretty much saved their season, and they're going to have one of those games. But obviously, as you guys know, that's not easy to do at Gillette.
All right, well, thank you very much, Steph. Everybody go follow her. She's one of the best in the business, and we'll be back after this on Patriot Central Radio.